apart from having culture changes, I try to blame the software developing company, the vendor, because sometimes we outsource some of this work to be done. So I'm a company that outsource the application to be done by you. When I give that job to you, a lot of things, there's something you call security triangle. If you Google that, you see a triangle which shows a ball which is supposed to be moved from one place to the other. There's usability, there's functionality, and then security. If the ball gets to be moved to one side of usability and functionality, you get to see that they only thought about making the app very user-friendly, and the functionalities are all working and there's no glitch, but security is always what? An afterthought. However, this is usually because of pressure from above. You see, if a lot of organizations say, look, Bank A has launched a new service, Bank B says, look, we have to get the same service done in 2 months. When you know, ideally, if you follow the secure software development life cycle, that should take you about 6 months. But the pressure that people get to release apps without going through the right process led them to actually develop applications with so many vulnerabilities that it's unimaginable. But the thing is, we on the user side, we have, if you use Android, we have Google Play Protect, which is supposed to scan Android applications and let you know that the app is not safe or it is safe. So you need to user awareness is essential for you to know that you don't just download any application from anywhere. Don't get it from WhatsApp groups and they say, hey, here's a link to my app, just download it. Because Alim and I did something, is it 3 years ago? We took an app from Play Store, reverse engineered that app and added an extra piece of code and malware. Until today, whenever I share that app with people, they still download it. It's been 3 years. And when you download that app, let me tell you what happens. We can send SMSs on your behalf. We can record the mic in the background silently to never ask for permissions. We can actually take pictures of you, activate the camera, take your WhatsApp database and go SIM swap you and then start the messages since WhatsApp is encrypted. And, well, we can do practically anything. So apps being sent to you directly without going through the Play Store. Play Store would have noticed that it's a malicious application. But people who send you just applications to try out, social engineering 101, don't just download anything they give you.
So what is the role of the authorities in all this? Because I have a feeling, as you said, there are commercial pressures to very quickly bring applications to market. There are third parties involved because these applications are not developed by the banks or financial institutions. They're developed by developers. So maybe you can just tell us what you think that governments and authorities should do to protect the public in this kind of a space.
The first step that I would say is just having a guideline, a general guideline. We have so many frameworks out there which can be used. One is called the OWASP, which is an Open Web Application Security Project, which can be used as a guideline to say, before you do anything mobile application like, follow these guidelines and make sure you adhere to them. So governments can actually give out that guideline saying, before you roll out any application, you have to actually submit a document saying it has been tested against all those guidelines. However, not just testing, not just following those right processes, but also be able to verify the person who is developing the application. Because many times, the cases that we see around is banks and financial institutions are not being hacked really by third parties. They're hacked by who? Internal staff. Internal people who come set up supporting systems or servers for the mobile application, but have ways to make sure they can make changes in the background. Typical example, mobile application was done here. Actually, maybe let me say about 20 loan apps that I've tested. When you want to request 5,000 Kenya shillings for yourself, you can change that amount to 20,000 Kenya shillings and push the number to somebody else. And legitimately, that will be a transaction that will be authenticated and the person will be paid. So assume I have all of you as my friends. And I tell you, every 20,000 you get, just send me 15, keep the 5. Don't you think you'll do that? Your job is just to send M-Pesa, right or wrong? So there's a syndicate of guys who I can feel that they are in Kenya right now, who are doing that thing. They are recruiting people in internal organizations to make sure that they can manipulate the back-end systems to do things that even the mobile application will see. So design, infrastructure design, infrastructure design has to be done properly, but an international guideline which we can set and say, if you don't produce any kind of record to say that you have followed the right processes, you should not launch an app.
Some of these guidelines do exist, but they're very high levels. I think a lot of the time it's really left for the interpretation for the end user. So I think the other aspect there, I think what the governments and the institutions really need to do is kind of define the specific things that you as the app developer or you as the organization is providing those services are clearly understanding as to what are you responsible for from a security perspective, and then you have those key elements that you are getting from the institution from a guidance perspective.
Main thing which has happened over the years is that central banks, for example, do have the supervision regulations, but it requires more granularity. In addition to that, there are existing principles when you look at the Basel principles of internal controls and risk management. If you go across the continent, go to any central bank, they do make the effort to do that, but it's the granularity part of it. Also, it's not only a matter for just the financial side. We have to do a cross-sectoral approach in handling this, because whether it's health, finance, or all the sectors, these salient things have to be put into place, and it requires a lot more enforcement, licensing regime to go with it. So, for example, you cannot just be an app developer. You must have gone through certain rigorous tests to say, yes, you have the stamp. If you recall, I'm a bit of an old school. In the earlier days, if you're going to do any financial transaction, you pick up a browser, you look for the gold tag. Something like that should exist especially with apps which have been downloaded. And so it makes it much easier for people to actually relate on a very basic 101 level. Secondly, there should be a lot more research. I talked about browser isolation technology. If I could ask now, how many people have heard about browser isolation technologies? Exactly. So we need to have more research, more advocacy, and more communication on these topics.
I think part of the problem is financial institutions, governments are not being as open as they could be about all the things that happen and all the risks that are there. Of course, commercially, there's the fear of losing the reputation and of losing customers. How far do you think we should go in enforcing openness about risks and incidents so that customers know what they're up against? And what are the pros and cons of being completely open?
There is something we call social responsibility, or corporate social responsibility. I think it requires more anyone looking at yourselves as corporate bodies, first of all, to say, look, are we being responsible to the extent of actually pushing these sort of applications out to the customers? Are we doing the right thing? Are we actually serving the purpose? At the end of the day, yes, you must make the customer keen, but at the same time, you have to make sure whatever actions you take are responsible and ethical. Okay? For the past few years, there's been a lot of, as I said, time-to-market pressures. When it comes to corporate responsibility, it is the board that is responsible for these things. So boards should be asking the right questions to their technologies. For example, when you talk about internal issues, you should be asking, how many monthly active users do we have internally accessing social media, WhatsApp, things like that? And out of those internal users, how many of them have actually clicked on malicious links? That should give you a fair idea of the problem you have internally. Okay? So this is one of the questions. The old way of doing things there's been a massive paradigm shift whereby the attack vectors are no longer on a very high scale attacking systems to penetrate into corporates. They are now attacking people. Okay, so a lot more effort has been put on that. Secondly, when it comes to customers, there is the need that you should have a much better transparent relationship with your customers to say, look, we think we might have been hacked, so please carry out the following actions. Let them know. Don't keep them up in the dark. As to government, well, when it comes to data and privacy issues, there are certain principles, state principles, which I say this because I worked on both sides, so it makes it much easier. There are certain types of data which cannot be disclosed for things to do with national security. There are certain incidents which have to be managed to avoid panic. Okay, but it doesn't mean that governments should sit on this data because, okay, we want to keep a good attitude. We don't want our neighboring country to know that we are so lousy at computer systems, or we don't even know how to switch on the computer. But these basic principles are what actually enables trust. Because if you do not communicate to your citizenry, you do not communicate to your customers. At some point in time, because we're dealing with highly safety critical or financial critical applications, if you lose trust, that's it. And a lot of our economies are actually moving towards the area where we are so highly dependent economically on these applications.
The transparency aspect is a key aspect as an institution, right? So if you have data breaches or if you have any losses, like often we as consumers, we are the last ones to know, even though it's our data that was compromised, right? So I think that's one aspect. And I think the other aspect is I think they also need to build that trust relationship with the consumers, because you as a consumer, if you don't have that trust with that institution you're working with, then you're going to move to another institution, right? And, there's many reports out there, but every time there's a breach of data, it costs an organization roughly about $159 US per person. And this is just not the cost of the breach, but this also sort of includes, of them losing business because people have lost that trust in that institution, and then they move to the other institutions. I think trust and transparency are going to be a key as we drive these relationships with the institutions and the new services that they, offer to us as consumers.
I will trust a financial institution who tells me publicly that, look, we've been hacked, we lost this amount of money, we've taken remediation steps to make sure that doesn't happen again, rather than hearing it from the news that somebody leaked out information that they have been hacked. That will create more panic, actually. So it's public disclosure laws that are out there which has to be taken into consideration, that every financial institution or any organization has to disclose if they have been compromised one way or the other. On the other hand, we have, for example, we have Kenya Bankers Association, where all the banks have communication with each other. Trust me, the hacking methodologies are always the same. They don't differ. And they're so simple that a 14-year-old kid can actually do that. Yes, I'm talking about 14-year-old kids right here in Kenya can carry out the same exploitations of these banking systems. And they could have been avoided if they just share information. But nobody wants to share information because they feel like they're going to get embarrassed that, oh, I'm the head of IT or the head of cybersecurity for a particular company, and I've been hacked. So maybe you look good out there, but now if you go tell all your colleagues that you've been hacked, it's an ego problem. So if organizations or banks can just talk to financial institutions can talk to each other in the forums that they have quite often, it will make it much easier that this is how I was hacked today, so you can go apply the same technology or the same way of protecting mechanisms against such a thing. If you have internal employees who have actually compromised the systems, let everybody know that they don't move, because they keep on moving from one place to the other and committing the same crime with the same name. So there's a public disclosure of such people, of what kind of acts they've committed.
So I'll start with Ketan, because you talked about trust and transparency. Now, I'm imagining that the bank of the future is going to be very different from the branches we're used to. In fact, there'll be more and more customers who have never been in a branch. What will be the main components of the new trust between customers and banks?
Great question, right? So I think, so I come from North America, and I think, as we were talking earlier, like, we still rely a lot more on the brick and mortar type institutions when it sort of comes to the bank. So if I want to get a draft or a certified check or even transfer money, sometimes I actually have to walk into a branch to drive some of those elements, while in this part of the world things are quite different, right? So so if I take things in perspective from North America, I think the trust aspect is going to come into play, where the institutions enable technologies but also sort of empower the users to ensure that when they're leveraging these technologies, they have that trust built into it. So in this way, if I'm transferring money, or if I'm moving funds from institution A to institution B, I'm able to effectively drive that. And obviously, if something goes wrong, then that transparency aspect, sort of comes into play. And I think the other thing, we also need to move away from the old legacy way of doing things to sort of the new way of handling from a security perspective, right? So I'm saying if you look at, a lot of our core systems today simply rely on usernames and passwords. So at some point we need to say, okay, well, how can we move away from an element like that to ensure that we are now harnessing other technologies and ways? So in this way, the simple things of phishing attacks, malwares, or bots that sit on our mobile phones or on our desktops, which are harvesting our credentials, are no longer stolen. So in this way, you still have some control over those things. I think, there's going to be a pragmatic change that we will have to kind of adhere to as institutions, organizations, and we as consumers need to push for those things so that institutions can help drive those things.
Now, in the past, we had something like a bank card, which was devoted to banking transactions. Now, I'm doing my banking on a device where I also do my dating, my social interactions, my work, and everything else. And all that data is available, gigabytes or even terabytes of it. What's going to happen? Because now it's not just about banking. Everything is here, and it's not just about me disclosing my information. It's about my device disclosing my information.
We are, in a way, responsible and not responsible. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't. So we give permission to applications these days for it to get access to what we wanted to get. That application that we created, it wasn't even a creation. It was speaking what already existed and making sure that we just tweaked a little bit of things here and there. The application still works normally as a shopping app. You will see the updated version of content from the main provider, and the shopping app actually works. I'm not going to mention which one it is, so don't ask me. But the thing is, information is power, and data is getting expensive. It's the new oil, right? And anybody who gets access to that data potentially gets access to almost everything. So from a user's perspective, I say we need a lot more awareness to be able to take action on all of those. From an industry perspective, there are three elements that people usually talk about: people, processes, and technology. But I want to add one more: controls. You can know the people in the organization and what they do, what they're supposed to do, and how they're supposed to make sure that systems are protected, that they're using the right technology to protect yourself, your systems, and your customers. And processes that you have to use to get there. But the controls that you put in place will be able to lock a few things here and there. So you don't open too much, you don't close too much on some sides of things. And that is the only way we're going to protect people. So everything that we're doing on the mobile application, we need to be very aware that somebody's seeing that. If you don't know, when you post a picture on Instagram, it goes to 7 other pages automatically the moment the picture goes online. These days, searching for information is not even that hard. If you use Google, you can find cameras in Karen and put them on and actually log in because of abilities that exist in those cameras. Do you know that? You can find every single resume of every Nairobi Universal lecturer that exists with one line of Google. You can find a movie that you want to get, not buy, to just not even live stream and download just because of one line of Google. You can use Google to get every single application that you ever wanted to buy or every game that you wanted to get with. Data always resides somewhere. There are ways of being able to extract that data from somebody or some means of getting access to them. So we need to be very vigilant on what we click, what we download, how we use, and what kind of information that we give out. How many people have been SIM swapped before? Anybody? Or how many of you got calls who somebody potentially says your SIM card has been registered twice? Yeah, and they tell you, oh, because your SIM card has been registered twice, we are calling from Safaricom and we want to verify that your account is safe, and getting your data is public. When you sign books, when you go to buildings, they know your ID number. With your ID number, it's quite easy to get everything about you. So such information, we need to be very aware that these people exist. They will always find ways to get our information, and the more information they get, the more power they have to be able to utilize that for other means.
Giving me legitimate concerns, and especially concern for the role central banks have to play in terms of regulating the financial system. Now, here you are, you have analog institutions. That's the central bank because they are very slow to respond to change. Then you have digital age financial institutions creating all the problems Bright is telling us in the system. Bright tells us that about 80% of the institutions or the systems used within the Kenyan financial system are hackable. Now, that should give us legitimate concern. Now, unfortunately, I think the former governor of the bank is here. I don't know if he has the capacity or even if he knows that that kind of a problem exists. Now, that's not peculiar to Kenya. It's everywhere. You have analog central banks, you have digital financial institutions. Analog is supposed to superintend over regulation of the digital institutions. Please, can you help us, the central bankers? Because you have the key. All of you sitting here, you have the key. Madam, you also have the key. Please, can you people help the central banks? Please.
I have a question to Bright. In most fintechs, when we pitch, our donors are interested with user experience and not with issues concerned about securities. So right now we are developing our app, and I ask our developers about the testing, if they do the testing and securities. And what they told me, that's a complex issue, it's been done by another company, and it is very, very expensive. So that's my impression I have right now. Your services are very expensive. So tell me about it. And then, if they are, what is the business model that you propose for people you offer your service? What's your business model to offer your services, especially for startups? Because most of us, we won't have the money to pay your services and we need them.
My question is, in a fast-moving economy or fast-moving culture like Kenya, where you need to output things very fast, how then do we mitigate the security gap for applications developed thus far? As you said, a new bank releases a new app with a new service. If any other bank lags behind, that's money lost, ideally. So how then do we mitigate that security gap?
And Dr. Bright came to our institution last year and talked about security issues. So after that, a lot of security enhancements were put in place. So my question is, how can institutions be careful so as not to overregulate, and which leads to curtailing of innovation? Because as it is, a lot of security enhancements have been put in place that you can't even access Google Drive or some of the softwares that we need to innovate. So that's my question.
Hi, my name is Jadida, and I think my question is really from the consumer side of it. You've talked about the need for awareness. But where do consumers get this awareness from? And not just for the banking apps, but for the entire devices, because we've seen the devices are giving out a lot of information. So are we talking about antiviruses? Are we talking about, I think Kaspersky have a safe browser. Is that even sufficient to protect you? When you're talking about apps, what is the consumer supposed to do in this when it comes to cybersecurity?
Okay, so we can have a round of answers now. Please be brief because of the timing. Yeah. Sure.
So I'll start with the startups. For startups, it's not that you have to define the scope of work. So when you define the scope of work of what you want to secure, you don't end up paying for everything. So what I know a lot of startups do is they want the entire security to be done by people like us, like me. For example, I have worked with a startup, and they're in the fintech space, and all they wanted was advisory. So I went and did training for the developers to know how to do secure development lifecycle and implement them and give them some tools and tips of how to do it. Some things, if you look at security practitioners, some of them don't even know how to do those fixes. We only know how to break, but making them sometimes become quite difficult. So have a very good scope of work where you want the person to actually engage. So if we engage, we get to just deal with certain things, not the entire suit. Talking about, wait, where is the question? About trying to get security to be done before rolling out another application. You need to educate everybody from the top, from the board level to senior management about why cyber resilience is important. So cybersecurity and cyber resilience are two different things. Cybersecurity, you are reacting to anything and everything. Cyber resilience, you are going to be protecting yourself by identifying things that will happen before they even happen, and how do you recover quite easily. So you need to make sure that everybody's on board, understand that the timelines that have to be implemented to actually roll out a new feature on an app or a new application has to come from the top. Otherwise, they will never understand why you need more time to be able to implement security features, or why you need 2 to 3 weeks to get a mobile application pen test done, or the likes. So that has to come from everyone. Institutions, it's not really, it can be segregated. If you do a proper network segregation, you can actually let students still use services without actually limiting them. We have next generation systems that are actually very intelligent enough to know that what you're trying to do is not anything malicious, but it's just it's just a normal usage of internet services that you want to do. So I don't think there's any kind of limitation that will get there, but your institution can actually implement those. User awareness, I'll take that to CA, because Communications Authority, I believe, stand at a very better point to be able to educate masses by running security programs. Oh, and actually, my PhD dissertation can be put in use, because what I did was how to actually create cybersecurity awareness for a country, not just an organization. So I think we'll have that discussion further.
And just to add to that, you need to use a reliable company to perform your security, like Bright. So before I joined the bank, we had a vendor, and we were releasing an internet banking solution. So we told them, all right, you need to perform a pen test, we need the report, if it's secure, we're good to go. They're like, all right, that's fine. They're like, all right, it's OWASP certified, it has all the security measures in place. So we're like, all right, it's good to go. And someone performed another pen test and be like, oh wait, I can get all the client's information, I can transfer money from one place to another. And so we sent an email back to the company and we're like, who certified you? So you should always use reliable companies.
So I'm just going to add on 2 key points. One was around the security side from a startup perspective, right? So as you mentioned, I think that's going to be the key element. But also, when you try to building the app, try to define those security capabilities day one. Like if you're building your app, you should have a good understanding of what are you developing, what sort of data are you keeping to help you drive those specific elements. The question around how do consumers sort of, educate themselves, right? So I think, again, I'm not from this part of the world, so I can't speak from this part of the world, but I know for us in North America, a lot of the financial institutions on their public websites are posting things as a consumer, what are the things you can do to protect yourself, right? We have some government incentives too at the government website where you can take this basic security aware training courses. But again, that's not enough. But I think as an end consumer, you can at least start there. And then the hope is that, as we move towards cyber resilience, some of these things will sort of be part of the core of the technologies to sort of really augment those capabilities where you need to kind of educate yourself all the time.